You don't belong here. The words cut through the cold air of the federal building lobby, sharp and certain, like they had been used 100 times before without question. Officer Travis Cole stood square in front of the glass entryway, one hand pressed firmly against the door, as if he alone decided who crossed that threshold. His badge caught the overhead light, gleaming just enough to draw attention, just enough to remind everyone watching who held authority in that moment. Naomi Brooks stood on the other side, calm still, her fingers loosely wrapped around a gray folder tucked against her side. She didn't step back. She didn't argue. She simply looked at him, her eyes steady in a way that didn't match the situation, as if she already knew how this would end. Around them, the lobby carried on in that quiet, mechanical rhythm of a government building, shoes tapping against polished floors, low murmurs, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, but something had shifted. People were watching now. Not openly, not boldly, but enough. A glance here. A pause there. Travis noticed it too, and it only fueled him. "Ma'am, I'm not going to say it again," he added, his tone tightening, leaning just slightly closer as if proximity alone could assert dominance. "This is a restricted federal space. You need to leave." Naomi's grip on the folder didn't change. "I have business here," she said, her voice even, controlled, not raised, not defensive. Just a statement. But Travis let out a short, dismissive breath, the kind that carried more judgment than words ever could. "Yeah, I'm sure you think you do." His eyes flicked down briefly to the folder in her hands, then back up, already having made his decision before she ever spoke. Without asking, without permission, he reached forward and took it from her. The motion wasn't rushed, wasn't aggressive, but it was deliberate. Possessive. Like the space itself belonged to him. Naomi didn't reach for it. That was the part that felt off. Most people would protest. Most people would react. She didn't. She just watched him, her gaze following the folder as it left her hands, her expression unchanged, almost unreadable. Somewhere above them, a soft chime echoed through the lobby. An elevator arriving. The sound barely registered at first, just another piece of background noise in a place built on routine. But then came the footsteps. Measured. Purposeful. And suddenly, the air shifted again. One by one, heads began to turn. Not toward Travis. Toward the sound. Toward the people stepping out into the lobby with a presence that didn't need to be announced. Travis didn't notice at first. He was still focused on Naomi, still holding that folder like evidence of something he hadn't even defined yet. "I'm going to need you to step away from the entrance," he continued, his voice firm, final. Naomi finally moved. Not back. Not away. Just one small step forward. Close enough that her voice didn't need to rise. "You might want to reconsider that," she said quietly. And for the first time, something in the room didn't feel routine anymore. Travis let out a quiet scoff, but there was a flicker of hesitation now, subtle enough that most would miss it, yet present all the same as the sound of approaching footsteps grew clearer against the polished floor, steady and unhurried, the kind of pace that did not rush because it never needed to, and Naomi did not turn to look, not yet, her eyes still fixed on him, holding his attention in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if she understood something he did not, and that alone unsettled him more than any raised voice ever could. "Reconsider what?" he replied, attempting to regain the edge in his tone, but it came out slightly thinner this time, less certain, as he adjusted his grip on the folder, flipping it open without permission, scanning pages he did not fully understand, lines of formal language, federal seals, signatures that carried weight far beyond the lobby he stood in, yet to him it was just paper, just another attempt, in his mind, to appear important. "You people walk in here with documents and think it means something," he muttered under his breath, not loud enough to announce, but loud enough to reveal exactly what he believed, and Naomi heard it, every word, yet her expression did not change, not anger, not frustration, just that same calm presence that now felt heavier, more intentional, as if she were allowing the moment to unfold exactly as it needed to. Around them the murmurs had faded into near silence, conversations cut short, movements slowed, the entire space holding its breath without realizing it, and then one voice broke through, firm but controlled. "Officer Cole!" It called out from behind him, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Travis turned slightly, irritation already forming before recognition had time to catch up, but when he did see who was approaching, something shifted again, not outwardly dramatic, not enough for most to notice, but enough that his posture straightened almost instinctively, the folder lowering just a fraction in his hands as Assistant Inspector General Victor Hale stepped forward with a measured calm that carried authority without needing to declare it. His gaze moved from Travis to Naomi and back again. Reading the situation in seconds, processing more in that glance than Travis had in the last 5 minutes. "Is there a problem here?" Hale asked, his tone even, but the question did not feel optional. Travis cleared his throat, quickly repositioning himself, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "No problem, sir, just handling access protocol," he said, gesturing lightly toward Naomi as if she were simply an inconvenience that had already been resolved. She was being escorted out. And for the first time, Hale's expression shifted, not into anger, not into surprise, but into something far more subtle and far more dangerous, recognition. His eyes settled on Naomi with a level of respect that did not match the situation Travis believed he was managing, and Naomi finally turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him, a small, almost imperceptible nod passing between them, and in that moment something invisible but undeniable moved through the room. Like a line being redrawn without anyone announcing it, Travis felt it without understanding it, the way the air seemed to tighten, the way no one spoke, the way even the smallest sounds suddenly felt too loud, and still he held on to the last thread of certainty he had, tightening his grip on the folder again, unaware that everything he thought he controlled was already slipping out of his hands. Travis forced a tight smile, but it did not reach his eyes, and the silence stretching across the lobby now felt heavier than before, pressing in from every direction as if the building itself was watching, waiting, measuring what came next. "Like I said, sir, just standard protocol," he repeated, though the words sounded rehearsed even to him, thinner now under the steady gaze of Assistant Inspector General Victor Hale, who did not respond immediately, did not interrupt, but simply extended his hand, palm open, not toward Naomi, but toward Travis, a quiet request that carried more authority than any raised voice could. "The folder," Hale said, calm and precise, and for a brief second, Travis hesitated, his fingers tightening around the edges as if letting go meant losing more than just a stack of papers, as if it meant admitting that something here had already moved beyond his control, and then he handed it over, slower than necessary, his eyes flicking between Hale and Naomi, trying to piece together what he was missing, what everyone else seemed to understand except him. Hale took the folder and glanced down, his expression unreadable at first, scanning a single page, then another, the silence deepening with each passing second until even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed too loud, and then he closed it, not abruptly, not dramatically, just with a quiet finality that carried weight. His eyes lifting back to Travis. "You intercepted her at the entrance," he said, not a question, not an accusation, just a statement, and Travis nodded quickly, stepping into the explanation he thought would restore order. "Yes, sir, she attempted to enter a restricted area without proper clearance. I was preventing unauthorized access." His voice regained a touch of confidence as he spoke, leaning into the structure he trusted, the rules he believed protected him. But Hale did not acknowledge the explanation the way Travis expected, did not nod, did not affirm. Instead his gaze shifted briefly to Naomi, and there was something in that glance, something quiet but unmistakable, respect, recognition, confirmation, and then back to Travis. "And at no point did you verify her credentials?" Hale continued, still even, still measured, but now the words began to land differently, heavier, more deliberate. Travis opened his mouth, then closed it again, the answer forming but not quite fitting the moment anymore, because suddenly the certainty he had leaned on felt incomplete, like a script missing its final lines. "She did not present anything conclusive," he said finally, though the statement sounded less solid than it had a minute ago. Hale held his gaze for a moment longer, then took a single step to the side, creating space, not blocking Naomi anymore, not even acknowledging the barrier Travis had tried to enforce, and in that simple movement, the dynamics shifted entirely, subtle but absolute. Naomi stepped forward, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. Her presence now no longer questioned by anyone except the man who had tried to stop her. She reached out and took the folder back from Hale, her fingers brushing the edge with familiarity, with ownership, and then she looked directly at Travis again, but this time there was no distance between them, no glass door, no physical barrier, just a few feet and the weight of everything he had just done settling into the space between them. "Officer Cole," Hale said quietly, his voice now carrying a firmness that could not be mistaken. "I suggest you pay very close attention to what happens next." And for the first time since this began, Travis felt something unfamiliar move through him, not fear, not yet, but the beginning of something he could not control, something that did not respond to his badge, his tone, or his assumptions, something that had already rewritten the rules of this moment without asking for his permission. The room did not erupt, it did not shift in any obvious dramatic way, but something invisible tightened, like a thread pulled too far to ever return to where it started, and Travis felt it in the way no one moved, no one spoke, no one even pretended this was still routine. Naomi stood there now with the folder back in her hands, not clutching it, not guarding it, just holding it as if it had always belonged there, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, but the silence around her had changed. It was no longer the silence of being overlooked, it was the silence of people realizing they had misjudged what they were seeing, and Travis could feel their eyes now, not on her, but on him, measuring, questioning, waiting. "Go ahead," Hale said quietly, his voice directed toward Naomi, not as permission, but as acknowledgement, and she gave a small nod. Then shifted her attention fully to Travis, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with a clarity that made every word that followed land heavier than any raised voice ever could. "You stopped me at the entrance without verifying credentials," she said, her tone even, steady, each word placed with intention. "You removed federal documents from my possession without authorization, and you attempted to deny access to a scheduled internal review." Travis opened his mouth, instinctively, searching for the response that had always worked before, the justification, the protocol, the shield of procedure that had protected him in every other moment like this. "I was following security guidelines," he said quickly, the words coming out faster now, less controlled. "Anyone can claim to have business here. I made a judgment call based on—" He stopped, just slightly, because the sentence did not finish the way it usually did, because for the first time he heard how it sounded outside. His own certainty. Naomi did not interrupt him, did not challenge him, she simply waited until the silence forced him to hear himself, and then she spoke again, softer now, but somehow more final. "Based on what?" she asked, and it was not a trap, not a confrontation, it was something far more precise, an opening that revealed exactly what had been driving every decision he made in the last few minutes. Travis hesitated, just long enough for the answer to become obvious without being spoken. And that was when Hale stepped in again, not to escalate, but to conclude. "Officer Cole," he said, his voice now carrying a weight that did not allow room for interpretation. "Ms. Brooks is the lead authority on the federal compliance review currently assigned to this facility." He paused, letting that settle, letting the meaning of it expand in the silence. "That review includes direct oversight of conduct, procedure, and enforcement actions tied to your department and your badge." The words did not come with volume, but they carried consequence, real, immediate consequence that did not need to be explained further. Travis felt it hit all at once, not like a sudden shock, but like a slow collapse of everything he had assumed to be fixed. His posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, the confidence draining out of it as the reality settled into place. Naomi did not move closer, did not step back, she simply stood there, meeting his gaze, not with triumph, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling, certainty. "This interaction," she continued, her voice calm, almost quiet now, "is now part of the record." And in that moment, Travis understood something he had not considered even once since this began. This was not just a misunderstanding, not just a moment that could be dismissed or explained away. This was documented, observed, recorded in ways that extended far beyond the people standing in that lobby, and for the first time, the badge on his chest did not feel like authority. It felt like something being evaluated, something being weighed, something that could be taken, not in anger, not in conflict, but through process, through evidence, through truth, and the silence that followed was no longer uncertain, it was final. The words did not echo, but they stayed, hanging in the air like something that could not be undone, and Travis felt the shift fully now, not just in the room, but inside himself, the quiet realization that every second leading up to this moment had already been sealed into something permanent, something that would not fade when the lobby emptied or when the day ended. His fingers twitched slightly at his side, no longer holding anything, no longer controlling anything, and for the first time, he looked at Naomi not as someone to manage, not as someone to remove, but as someone he had completely misread from the very beginning. I did not know, he said, the words coming out lower, less certain, not as an excuse, but as something closer to a reflex, something said because silence felt heavier than speaking. But Naomi did not respond immediately, she did not interrupt, she let the weight of what had already been said settle fully before answering, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. You did not ask. She replied, calm, direct, and the distinction landed harder than anything else that had been said so far, because it stripped away the idea that this was about missing information, about confusion, about anything accidental, and replaced it with something far more difficult to stand on, assumption. Travis swallowed, his eyes flicking briefly toward Hale as if searching for something to stabilize the moment, but there was nothing there to hold on to, no signal to soften what had just been established, only quiet observation, measured and final. The kind that did not intervene because it did not need to. There are procedures? Travis tried again, his voice finding a small thread of structure to follow. We are trained to assess risk, to make quick decisions when something does not look right. The sentence felt safer as he said it, familiar, practiced, something he had relied on for years. But Naomi did not challenge the existence of those procedures, she did not deny them, she simply tilted her head slightly, considering his words before responding. Procedures are meant to guide judgment, not replace it, she said, and again there was no anger, no raised tone, just clarity. They are not designed to exclude without verification, and they are not designed to act before understanding. Travis felt the sentence settle deeper than the last, because it was not just about what had happened, it was about how it had happened, the sequence, the choices. The moment he decided he already knew enough without confirming anything at all. Around them the silence held, but it had changed again, no longer tense, no longer uncertain, now it felt observant. Like the room itself was recording more than just actions, recording meaning, intention, consequence, and Naomi took a small breath, not to steady herself, but as if marking a transition, her voice continuing with the same controlled precision. This review was scheduled weeks in advance, she said, tapping the edge of the folder lightly with one finger. Notifications were sent, access logs prepared, personnel briefed, and yet the first point of contact failed before the process even began. She did not say his name again, she did not need to, because everyone understood exactly who that point of contact was. Travis felt the words settle into place, each one narrowing the space around him, not physically, but in terms of explanation, of justification, of anything that could reframe what had already occurred. And Hale stepped forward just slightly, not to interrupt, but to reinforce the direction this was taking. This is why oversight exists, he said, his tone calm but firm. Not to punish without cause, but to ensure that authority is exercised with accountability. And the word accountability seemed to linger longer than the rest. Echoing quietly in the space between them, Travis nodded slowly, not because he agreed in that moment, but because there was nothing else left to do, no ground left to hold, and Naomi watched him for a second longer, not with judgment, not with satisfaction, but with something far more steady, a kind of final acknowledgement that the moment had revealed exactly what it needed to reveal. We will proceed inside, she said at last, turning slightly toward the entrance he had blocked just minutes ago, and without another word she walked forward, passing through the doorway that had once been closed to her, not with force, not with resistance, but with quiet certainty, and this time, no one stopped her. The doors closed softly behind Naomi, but the sound carried further than it should have, like a quiet line being drawn between what had just happened and what was about to unfold next, and Travis remained where he stood, just outside the threshold he had tried to control, his eyes fixed on the space she had just walked through, as if expecting something to reverse, something to correct the moment, but nothing did. The lobby resumed its motion slowly, cautiously, like people were unsure if it was safe to return to normal yet. Conversations picked up in hushed tones, footsteps resumed, but the air had changed, and it was not going back. Hale paused near the entrance, turning slightly toward Travis, not with urgency, not with frustration, but with a level of attention that felt far more deliberate. "You will remain available," he said, his voice calm, leaving no room for interpretation. "There will be questions, and you will answer them clearly." Travis nodded almost immediately, the response automatic, but the weight behind it was new, unfamiliar, because this was no longer a situation he could manage in the moment, no longer something he could redirect or contain. This had moved beyond him, and he could feel it, every second of it settling deeper. "Yes, sir," he replied, quieter now, the firmness gone, replaced with something closer to restraint. Hale studied him for a brief moment longer, not searching for defiance, not expecting resistance, just confirming what had already been established, then gave a slight nod and turned to follow Naomi inside, leaving Travis alone with the echo of everything that had just been said, and for a moment, he did not move, his hand drifting unconsciously toward his badge, brushing against it lightly, as if to remind himself it was still there, still his. But the feeling was different now, not solid, not certain, more like something under review. Something being measured in ways he could not see. Across the lobby, a few people glanced in his direction, not openly, not confrontationally, but enough that he noticed, enough that he felt it, the shift in perception, the subtle change from authority to question, and he straightened slightly, adjusting his stance, trying to reassemble the posture he had worn so easily before, but it did not sit the same anymore, not after what had just unfolded. Above him, a security camera remained fixed, its small red light blinking steadily, indifferent, constant, and for the first time, Travis became aware of it in a different way, not as part of the environment, but as a witness, something that had seen every word, every gesture, every decision, recorded without bias, without interpretation, just fact, and that realization settled quietly, deeply, because it meant this moment was not contained within the memory of those who stood there, it existed beyond it, documented, preserved, ready to be reviewed in a context where tone, posture, and timing would matter in ways he had not considered in the moment. A uniformed colleague approached from across the lobby, slowing slightly as he neared, uncertain how to engage. "Everything good here?" the man asked carefully, his voice low, neutral, and Travis hesitated, just for a second, before answering. "Yes," he said, though the word felt incomplete, like it no longer held the clarity it once did. The colleague nodded, not pressing further, sensing something unspoken, then moved on, leaving Travis once again standing in a space that no longer felt entirely his. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds. Time seemed to stretch differently now, measured not by movement, but by thought, by the slow realization of consequence unfolding piece by piece. And then, finally, Travis took a step forward, toward the door, not with the same certainty as before, not with control, but with something quieter, more aware, as if each step carried a new understanding of what it meant to enter that space, not as someone who decided who belonged, but as someone who would now have to answer for how he chose. The hallway beyond the entrance felt different from the lobby, quieter, more controlled, like every sound had a purpose and every movement was measured, and as Travis stepped inside, the soft echo of his own footsteps followed him in a way that made him more aware of each step than he had ever been before, the polished floors reflecting not just the overhead lights but the tension he carried with him, subtle but undeniable. He moved forward slowly, his eyes scanning ahead until he caught sight of Naomi and Hale further down the corridor, already engaged in a low conversation with two other officials, their posture relaxed, their attention focused, as if the moment at the entrance had already been processed and filed away into something larger, something ongoing, and that realization settled into Travis again. This was not an isolated incident, not a single mistake. This was part of something structured, something systematic, something that would be examined piece by piece. He slowed his pace slightly, unsure now of how close he should get, unsure of where he fit into this space that had once felt so clearly defined. "Officer Cole!" Hale's voice reached him before he could decide, not raised, not sharp, but precise enough to stop him where he stood. Travis straightened instinctively, stepping forward just enough to close the distance. "Yes, sir," he replied, the words automatic, but the tone different now, measured, cautious. Hale gestured toward a conference room just ahead, its glass walls revealing a long table already set with files, tablets, and neatly arranged folders. "We will continue this discussion inside," he said, then turned without waiting for a response, leading the group toward the room. Naomi followed without hesitation, her presence steady, unaffected, as if this was exactly where she had always intended to be. Travis lingered for a fraction of a second before stepping after them. The shift from the open hallway into the enclosed room felt immediate, the air slightly cooler, the space more focused, like everything inside was designed for clarity, for documentation, for truth to be laid out without distraction. Chairs lined the table evenly, each position deliberate, each seat a place where something would be said, something would be recorded. Naomi moved to one side of the table, placing her folder down with quiet precision, opening it just enough to reveal the structured pages within. Hale took a seat nearby, his posture relaxed but attentive, while the other officials positioned themselves without needing direction, each movement practiced, efficient. Travis remained standing for a moment longer than necessary, uncertain which chair belonged to him, uncertain of his place in a room that now felt less like a workspace and more like a point of evaluation. "You may sit," Naomi said, her voice calm, not dismissive, not commanding, simply acknowledging his presence within the process. Travis nodded and took a seat across from her, the distance between them not far, but enough to feel defined. He placed his hands lightly on the table, fingers still, resisting the urge to adjust, to fidget, to do anything that might draw attention. Naomi glanced down at the documents briefly, then back up at him, her eyes steady, focused. "This review is not about a single moment," she began, her tone even, controlled. "It is about patterns, decisions, and how authority is applied over time." The words settled into the room with quiet weight, not accusatory, not emotional, just factual, and that made them harder to deflect. Travis listened, his posture upright, his expression composed, but inside, the realization continued to build. This was not something that would pass quickly, not something that would be resolved with a single explanation. This was a process, detailed, thorough, and already in motion long before he had stepped in front of that door. Naomi continued, her voice steady. "What happened at the entrance is now part of a broader assessment," she said, "and it will be evaluated alongside prior reports, recorded interactions, and procedural adherence." She paused briefly, not for effect, but to allow the meaning to settle fully, then added, "Every detail matters." And in that moment, Travis understood something with complete clarity. This was no longer about control, no longer about authority in the way he had always defined it. This was about accountability, measured carefully, recorded precisely, and unfolding one decision at a time. Naomi did not rush, she did not raise her voice, and that was what made the room feel tighter with every passing second, because nothing about this moment relied on force or urgency, it relied on clarity, and clarity left no space to hide. She turned a single page in the folder, the soft sound of paper moving echoing faintly in the quiet room. Then she slid a document across the table toward Travis, not aggressively, not abruptly, just enough for it to rest within his reach. "This is an excerpt from the internal access log," she said, her tone steady, neutral. "Timestamps, entry attempts, and flagged interactions from the past 90 days. Travis glanced down at it, his eyes scanning lines of data, dates, times, short descriptions that seemed routine at first glance. But the more he looked, the more a pattern began to form, subtle but consistent. moments where access had been questioned, delayed, or denied under circumstances that now felt uncomfortably similar. His jaw tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in recognition. Naomi watched him, not judging, not pressing. Just allowing the information to do what it was meant to do, reveal. This review was not triggered by a single complaint, she continued, her voice calm. It was initiated after multiple observations indicated a deviation from standard verification procedures. Hale leaned back slightly in his chair, his hands folded loosely in front of him, his presence quiet but reinforcing, as if confirming every word without needing to repeat it. Travis lifted his eyes from the document, his thoughts moving faster now, trying to connect each detail, each moment, each decision that had once felt isolated, justified, routine, and now seemed part of something larger, something that carried consequences he had not considered. These situations require quick judgment, he said, his voice measured, careful, choosing each word with more intention than before. You do not always have the luxury of extended verification. Naomi nodded slightly, acknowledging the point without dismissing it. That is true, she said, but quick judgment does not remove the responsibility to remain objective. She paused, briefly, letting the distinction settle. And it does not justify patterns that consistently lead to the same type of outcome. The room remained still, every person present focused, not just on the exchange, but on the meaning behind it. Travis felt the weight of that statement more than the words themselves, because it was not accusing him of one action, it was pointing to repetition, to consistency, to something that could not be explained away as a single moment of misjudgment. Naomi reached for another document, this one thinner, more concise, and placed it beside the first, aligning the edges carefully. Witness observations, she said simply, and Travis's eyes moved to it, reading short. Statements, neutral descriptions of interactions, tones, behaviors, each one small on its own, but together forming something difficult to ignore. He exhaled slowly, not in frustration, but in the quiet realization that this was no longer about defending a single choice. This was about understanding a pattern he had never stopped to question. Hale's voice entered the space again, calm and grounded. This process is not designed to assume intent, he said. It is designed to evaluate impact. And that distinction landed differently, deeper, because intent could be argued, explained, defended, but impact was visible, measurable, documented. Naomi looked at Travis once more, her expression unchanged, but her focus unwavering. Today's interaction did not create this review, she said. It confirmed it. And in that moment, the silence that followed was not uncertain, it was clear, because for the first time, everything that had seemed separate, isolated, explainable, had aligned into something undeniable, and there was no urgency in the room, no raised voices, no dramatic shift, just the steady, unmovable presence of truth being placed piece by piece onto the table in front of him. Travis did not speak right away, and that silence said more than anything he could have offered, his eyes still fixed on the documents in front of him, but no longer scanning them for errors or inconsistencies. Instead, he was seeing them differently now, not as isolated records, not as routine entries, but as reflections of choices he had made without ever pausing long enough to question them. The room remained still. No one rushing to fill the space, no one interrupting the process unfolding in front of him, because this was the moment that mattered, the moment where explanation either held or collapsed under its own weight. Travis finally lifted his head, his posture still upright but less rigid now, less certain. Those entries do not show intent, he said, his voice steady but quieter than before, not defensive, but searching for something to anchor to, something that still made sense in a situation that had shifted beyond his expectations. Naomi did not immediately respond, she let the statement settle, then gave a small nod, acknowledging the point without conceding anything. You are correct, she said, her tone measured. They do not show intent. She paused briefly, her eyes steady on his. But they do show consistency. And that word landed with a different kind of weight, because consistency could not be explained away as coincidence. It required repetition, it required pattern, it required a level of predictability that pointed to something deeper than a single Decision made under pressure. Travis exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting back down to the table, to the alignment of papers that now felt less like documents and more like evidence of something he had never fully acknowledged. I treated each situation based on what I saw in the moment, he said, the words coming carefully now, deliberate. There was no plan behind it. Naomi leaned forward just slightly, not in confrontation, but in focus, her voice still calm, still controlled. That is exactly what is being evaluated, she replied. Not whether there was a plan, but how those moments were interpreted, and how those interpretations affected access, treatment, and outcome. The distinction settled clearly, leaving little room for deflection, because it shifted the focus away from what he intended to what actually happened as a result of his actions. Hale's presence remained steady beside her, his gaze moving between them, observing, confirming, ensuring the process stayed grounded. Patterns do not require intention to exist, he added quietly. They only require repetition. Travis felt that settled deeper than anything else that had been said, because it reframed everything. It removed the shield he had relied on, the belief that without intent, there could be no real issue, and replaced it with something far more concrete, something that did not depend on what he believed about himself, but on what his actions consistently produced. The room remained silent again. But this time it was not heavy, it was clear, structured, like each piece of information had found its place, and now there was nothing left to blur the picture. Naomi glanced briefly at the documents, then back at Travis, her expression unchanged, but her tone carrying a quiet finality. The purpose of this review is not to assign blame without understanding, she said. It is to determine whether the application of authority aligns with the standards it is meant to uphold. She let that settle before continuing. And right now, the alignment is being questioned. Travis nodded slowly, not because he fully accepted everything yet, but because he understood that the conversation had moved beyond argument, beyond immediate defense, into something more precise, more structured, something that would not be resolved in a single statement or a single explanation. And as he sat there, surrounded by documents, by quiet observation, by a process that had already been set in motion long before he realized it, one thing became undeniable: this was no longer about what he thought he was doing. It was about what his actions had already shown. The room did not change, but the weight inside it did, settling deeper now that everything had been laid out with a clarity that could not be avoided. Travis sat still, his hands resting on the table, no longer shifting, no longer searching for something to hold on to, because there was nothing left to reach for that had not already been examined. Every word he had spoken, every decision he had made at that entrance now existed beyond the moment, placed into a structure that would not forget, would not overlook. Naomi watched him for a brief second, not pressing, not rushing, allowing the silence to do what it was meant to do, to force reflection, to make space for understanding that could not be rushed into existence. Then she moved again, not dramatically, just turning one more page, her voice steady as it entered the space once more. There's one more element that needs to be addressed, she said, and the tone was not heavier, but it carried a different kind of finality, like something that would close the gap between observation and conclusion. Travis lifted his eyes again, slower this time, prepared now in a way he had not been before, not to argue, not to defend, but to listen, because he understood that whatever came next would not be about interpretation, it would be about confirmation. Naomi slid a small device across the table, a tablet, its screen already active, paused at a specific frame, the image clear, unmistakable, the lobby entrance, the glass door, the exact moment he had stepped forward, hand pressed against the barrier, blocking access. His posture firm, his expression set. She did not press play immediately. She let him see it first, let him recognize himself in that frozen moment. All entry points are recorded, she said calmly. Audio and visual. Travis felt the shift again, deeper this time, because this was no longer documentation based on reports or written observations. This was direct, unfiltered, something that could not be reframed or explained differently depending on perspective. Naomi tapped the screen lightly, and the footage moved, the sound low but clear enough, his own voice filling the room, repeating the words he had spoken minutes earlier. now detached from the moment. Stripped of context, presented exactly as they were, the silence in the room became sharper, more defined, not heavy, but precise, as if every second of that recording carried its own weight, its own place in what was being built here. Travis did not look away. He watched, not because he wanted to, but because he understood that looking away would not change what had already been captured. Hale remained still, his presence unchanged, allowing the footage to speak for itself, to confirm what had already been discussed without needing to repeat it. The recording ended, and Naomi paused it again, leaving the final frame on the screen. Then she looked back at Travis, her expression the same as it had been from the beginning, composed, focused, unwavering. "This is where interpretation ends," she said quietly, "and where evaluation begins." The words did not carry judgment, they carried transition, the movement from discussion into consequence, from possibility into certainty. Travis inhaled slowly, his gaze lingering on the screen for a moment longer before shifting back to her, and in that moment, something had changed, not in the room, not in the process, but in him. The resistance that had once filled his responses was no longer there, replaced by something quieter, more grounded, an understanding that this was not a moment he could move past, this was a moment he would have to move through, step by step, with everything now visible, everything now recorded, everything now undeniable. No one spoke immediately after the screen went still, and that silence felt different from the ones before, not uncertain, not heavy, but complete, like something had reached its natural end without needing to be forced there. Travis kept his eyes on the tablet for a moment longer, not because he needed to see it again, but because looking away meant fully stepping into what it represented, and when he finally did lift his gaze, it was slower, more deliberate, as if even that small movement carried weight now. Naomi did not rush to fill the space, she allowed it to exist, to settle, because this was the point where understanding had to come from him, not from anything else placed in front of him. "Do you recognize the sequence of events?" she asked quietly, her tone steady, not challenging, not accusatory, just direct. Travis nodded once, a small motion, but clear. "Yes," he said, his voice lower than before, stripped of the confidence that had once filled it, replaced now with something more measured, more aware. "And do you understand how those actions align with the concerns raised in this review?" She continued, and again, the question did not demand a defense, it asked for acknowledgement, for connection, for the ability to see beyond the moment into the pattern that had already been established. Travis hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because he did not know the answer, but because saying it out loud meant accepting it in a way that could not be undone. "Yes," he repeated, more firmly this time, though the firmness did not come from certainty, it came from recognition. Hale shifted slightly in his chair, his attention focused, not intervening, not guiding, just observing the transition as it happened in real time. Naomi gave a slight nod, not in approval, but in acknowledgement that the process had reached the point it needed to reach. She closed the folder in front of her with a quiet, controlled motion, aligning it neatly on the table, then folded her hands lightly on top of it, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. "Then we move forward," she said, and the words carried a different weight now, no longer about discussion, but about outcome, about what came next. Travis sat still, absorbing that, understanding that moving forward did not mean leaving this behind, it meant carrying it into whatever followed, into decisions that would now be made with everything laid out, everything considered, everything documented. "This review will continue with a full evaluation of your conduct records, field interactions, and compliance with federal access standards," Naomi continued, her voice even, structured, each word precise. "You will be notified of each stage, and you will have the opportunity to respond within the framework provided." Travis nodded again, this time without hesitation, because there was nothing left to resist. Nothing left to reframe, the process was already in motion, and his role within it had been clearly defined. Hale leaned forward slightly, his voice centering the space once more, calm but grounded. "This is not the end of your responsibility," he said. "It is the beginning of your accountability." And that distinction settled quietly, firmly, because it made clear that what mattered now was not what had happened, but what would follow, how it would be addressed, how it would be understood, how it would be corrected. Travis exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly, not because the situation had become easier, but because it had become clear, defined, no longer uncertain, and in that clarity, there was something different, something that did not rely on control or authority, but on understanding, on recognition, on the willingness to see what had been placed in front of him without looking away. Naomi stood then, not abruptly, not signaling urgency, just a natural movement that marked the close of this part of the process. Hale followed, and the others in the room began to gather their materials, each motion quiet, efficient, as if this was simply another step in a system designed to move forward with or without resistance. Travis remained seated for a moment longer, watching as the room shifted around him. Then he stood as well, not because he was told to, but because he understood that staying seated no longer made sense, and as he did, one thought settled clearly, fully, without distraction. The badge he wore had not changed, but what it represented had, and from this point on, every action tied to it would carry a weight he could no longer ignore. The room did not empty all at once, it dissolved gradually, chairs sliding back with quiet restraint, documents gathered with practiced precision, voices lowered to near silence as each person carried their role forward into the next stage of the process. Naomi moved toward the door with the same steady composure she had maintained from the beginning, her steps unhurried, her posture unchanged. As if nothing about the moment required adjustment, as if everything had unfolded exactly as it was meant to. Hale paused beside her briefly, exchanging a few quiet words that did not need to be heard to be understood, then continued on, leaving Travis standing just behind the table, no longer at its center, no longer the focus, but still very much within the structure that had formed around him. He looked down at the surface where the documents had been, now cleared, the space empty again. But not in the way it had been before. It felt different now, as if something invisible remained. Something that could not be removed simply because the papers were gone. He took a slow breath, letting it settle, letting the silence that followed exist without trying to break it, and then he stepped away from the chair, moving toward the hallway with a pace that reflected something new, not hesitation, not uncertainty, but awareness, the kind that comes when a moment reshapes how everything is seen. Moving forward, outside the conference room, the building carried on as it always had, staff moving between offices, quiet conversations in passing, the steady rhythm of a system designed to function regardless of any single interruption. But for Travis, the environment felt different now, not because it had changed, but because he had, every detail more noticeable, every interaction more defined, as if the lens through which he viewed it had shifted without warning. He walked past the same corridor he had entered earlier, the same polished floors, the same overhead lights. But the familiarity no longer brought certainty, it brought reflection, each step a reminder of how easily routine can become assumption. How quickly authority can move without question when it is not examined. He reached the lobby again, the wide open space now quieter than before, the earlier tension replaced by something more subtle, something that lingered just beneath the surface. A few people glanced in his direction, not in judgment, not openly, but enough that he noticed. Enough that he understood that moments like the one at the entrance did not simply disappear, they echoed, quietly, in ways that extended beyond the immediate. He paused near the door, the same glass barrier that had once felt like a point of control, now simply a passage, nothing more, nothing less. He looked at it for a second longer than necessary, not to relive what had happened, but to acknowledge it, to recognize the point where everything had shifted, and then he stepped through it, the motion simple, unremarkable, but carrying a different weight than it had before. Outside, the air felt slightly warmer, the noise of the city more present, grounding in a way that the controlled environment inside had not been. He stood there for a moment, letting the contrast settle, letting the transition register fully, and as he did, one thought remained clear, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, constant. The badge he wore had always represented authority, but now it demanded something more, something deeper, something that could no longer be taken for granted, and as he walked forward, away from the building, that understanding stayed with him. Not as a burden, but as a responsibility that could not be ignored. Not anymore. The city moved the same way it always did, steady, indifferent, carrying on without pause, but for Travis, nothing about the day felt routine anymore. Each step along the sidewalk felt measured. Not because he was forcing it, but because something inside him had shifted in a way that could not be undone. The sound of distant traffic, the low murmur of conversations passing by, even the rhythm of his own breathing felt sharper, clearer, as if the noise around him had faded just enough for him to finally hear what had always been there beneath it. He stopped at the edge of the street, waiting as the signal changed. His reflection faintly visible in the glass of a nearby building uniform. Press, badge still in place, unchanged in appearance, but no longer untouched by meaning. He looked at it briefly, not with pride, not with doubt, but with something quieter, something more grounded, understanding, because for the first time, he was not seeing it as something that gave him control, he was seeing it as something that required it, control over judgment, over assumption. Over the decisions made in moments that felt small but carried weight far beyond what he had allowed himself to consider. Behind him, the federal building stood tall, silent, its glass reflecting the sky above, a place that had not changed, yet had revealed something that would not leave him. Inside those walls, every word, every action had been recorded, examined, placed into a system that did not rely on perception but on truth, and that truth had not needed force. It had not needed confrontation, it had simply been revealed. Piece by piece, until there was nothing left to question. The signal shifted, and he stepped forward, crossing with the same calm pace, blending into the movement of the city, but carrying something different with him, not visible, not spoken, but present, a recognition that authority was never meant to stand alone, that it was tied to something deeper, something that did not announce itself but was always there, waiting to be upheld or ignored. And as he reached the other side, he did not look back. Not because he wanted to forget, but because he understood. That forgetting was not the point was what came next, the choices that would follow, the moments that would test whether anything had truly changed. And somewhere inside that building, Naomi continued her work, not focused on him, not anchored to that single interaction, but moving forward within a system designed to ensure that moments like that were not isolated, not dismissed, but understood and addressed, not through anger, not through force, but through clarity, through accountability, through truth that did not need to be raised to be heard. And as the distance between them grew, the impact of that brief encounter remained. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, like a quiet line drawn between what had been and what would now have to be different, because in the end, he had worn the badge believing it defined power. But that day, he had come face to face with something else entirely, something that did not need to be worn to be real, something that did not need to be shown to be absolute. And as the city carried him forward, that realization stayed with him, clear and unshakable. The badge gave him authority. But the truth had already decided what he would do with it.